I'm Kent Justice. Thanks so much for joining us for This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. We are always focused on economic growth and development in Northeast Florida, Southeast Georgia, our region, our state. And this is really cool. So Robert Peak is Chief Commercial Officer at JAXPORT. And the Port of Jacksonville recently had basically a state of the port kind of news conference. I thought, well, we want to dive in a little bit more here. On the face of things, the broad picture, where do things stand at the port right now for Jacksonville?
The port's doing very well, particularly this year. We run on a fiscal year starting October 1st. So the first quarter of our fiscal year, we had about our best fiscal year we've ever had, particularly for shipping containers, which is all the consumer goods and manufactured parts that go in and out of the port. Probably our best quarter ever. And it really has been a kind of a gangbuster early start of the year for us.
So here we are, 2025, and I'm going to get to, hey, what does that look like for you this year? But the first part of the 2020s.
Right.
Whew, wow. What a tough stretch given pandemic and supply chain constrictions, all of these kinds of things. Where have things been in this first half of the decade? You know,
the first 5 years of this decade were probably the nuttiest that I think we've seen, well, maybe ever.
Nutty.
Because we started, it's hard to believe COVID was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But so the whole COVID, pandemic turned everything upside down. We had the Panama Canal had to be restricted for a while because there was a drought in Panama. The Red Sea, the Suez Canal actually pretty much shut down to a lot of commercial ship traffic because there were terrorist attacks there. And then now we have a lot of trade policy talk going on. So it seems like that as soon as you're kind of taking a deep breath over one thing, something else kind of comes right around the corner.
Yeah. So where is JAXPORT positioned for 2025 and beyond? And I think, the 15 years I've been here in town, one of the big projects was deepening the channel and, hey, we want more traffic. How have those projects been and how do they set you up for what's to come?
Yeah, so we did finish the harbor deepening project through our Blunt Island terminal a couple of years ago. And Ken, I think it's probably the single most important project in the last 20 years of the port. And looking forward, could be the most important project in the next 20 years in terms of that having completed. Because what it has allowed our port to do is to retain all the business, the international global business that we've acquired that's needed deep water over the years, and to actually attract a lot of new business to our port, and we will for many, many years. So that project really has been a terrific project for us.
So you've seen numbers, and I don't know if you have numbers off the top of your head, but what's the financial impact, not just for port, but probably there's a regional impact when we do have more traffic?
We do, Kent. In fact, we call ourselves an economic engine for Northeast Florida, and you've kind of put your finger on it. The reason that we do things like deepen the shipping channel and have all the capital investment we do into the port is we want to create jobs and business opportunity for residents throughout Northeast Florida. And we have an economist periodically come in and basically count how many jobs are what we call port dependent in Northeast Florida. And he just finished this study. He said there's 30,000 jobs in Northeast Florida that are dependent upon the port. That includes not only the direct jobs like all the longshoremen who are loading, unloading the ships. There's 100 trucking companies with depots or offices in Jacksonville. There's literally a couple of hundred warehouses, import distribution centers that do business here, the railroads. So you start adding up not just the people physically at the port, but everyone who touches that freight and relies on the port. It's like 30,000 jobs in Northeast Florida.
So what's the specialty of what JAXPORT does? And I bring this up because I recently heard, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Brunswick or Savannah or somebody say, hey, we're all about, we've got vehicles that we come through here. What's JAXPORT known for? What's the specialty there?
Sure, so there's a couple things. One is our claim to fame really is we are the largest port in the United States for trade with the island of Puerto Rico. So, and Puerto Rico is our largest trading partner. We are the largest and busiest container port in the state of Florida, which is the shipping containers. We move more than any other Florida port. We're the 10th largest port in the United States for handling shipping containers. And you mentioned automobiles. We're the 3rd busiest port in the United States for handling automobiles. We do over 500,000 vehicles through the Port of Jacksonville, imported and exported every year. So our claim really is what we call diversification. We handle lots of different kinds of cargoes, and we're large in a number of different segments.
Well, the diversification, you and I talking before our interview here, that's a focus right now, is that correct?
It is. It's a really big one, Kent, and specifically not only the types of cargo we handle, but what we call trade lane diversification, and that's where we trade. So I mentioned that the island of Puerto Rico is our largest trading partners, and they're extremely important to us. But over the years, in addition to having Puerto Rico, we've also found ships that will sail directly between Jacksonville and ports all over the world. So every week, in and out of the Port of Jacksonville, there are ships that sail between the east coast of South America, west coast of South America, Central American countries, the Caribbean islands, Asia, North Asia, now South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Northern Europe, West Africa. And this is by design. If you look at a map of the world, that's what we want. We want to see dots on it where there are ports, and there are ships going from those ports to and from the Port of Jacksonville.
Stops in between? I mean, some of those places you just mentioned, boy, those are a long ways away.
Yeah, so the way that most of these ship services work is that ship will call on several ports, let's say in Asia. It'll call on several ports in Asia, and then it'll sail either through the Suez or Panama Canal and then stop at several ports on the east coast of the United States, Jacksonville being one of them.
Yeah. What is the impact that you and JAXPORT leadership sees coming because of proposed tariffs, because of what we've heard about Panama Canal? You mentioned Suez Canal. I've heard that there's been some disruption there in the last several months as well. Those are some of the external factors that could really make an impact locally, right?
Yes, so tariffs, you mentioned tariffs, it's interesting. Tariffs are, as you know, they're tax on imports. And ports are not directly impacted by tariffs, they're indirectly impacted because ports don't collect tariffs or get paid tariffs. But where ports can be impacted is if you have tariffs, which are import taxes, and those taxes go up, and whoever is importing that product decides to pass that cost of that on to downstream, let's say to consumers or businesses, and those businesses or consumers decide, I'm not going to buy as much product that I used to, then we don't see as much volume through the port. So, but what tariffs are actually going to be imposed and the actual impact of that is really kind of uncertain for ports because there's been a lot proposed, but there hasn't been a lot of decisions about what actually will go into effect yet. Yeah,
we've heard that from the outset in the first month of President Trump's new administration. We've heard tariff here, well, we'll pause, we'll give it a little time. So it's got to be tough to kind of figure out on the front end without having them actually enacted yet.
The one that has been enacted is President Trump did impose a new 10% tariff on all imported goods from China, which is on top of already existing tariffs from China. But again, we talked about our trade lane diversification. Cargo with China comprises perhaps less than 10% of our cargo in terms of the revenue that's generated to the Port of Jacksonville, maybe 10%. So of all of our revenue. So a 10% tariff or 10% tax on Chinese-made goods is my assumption is not going to have a significant impact on imports and exports, and because it's 10% of our volume, I don't think it's going to have a significant impact on us. But that is one tariff that's actually in effect. Yeah. To your point, the rest are right now they're proposed.
Are there still delays through the supply chain? Have we seen that solve itself over time?
More or less, yes. It's more or less been resolved. Certainly much better than it was a few years ago. But we mentioned the challenges in the canals. The Panama Canal, there was a drought about a year ago, and the water levels in the Panama Canal dropped. And so not all the ships that needed to go through the canal could go through the canal, so the ships had to sail around the tip of South America. In the Suez Canal, there were terrorist attacks, or there are terrorist attacks in the Red Sea. And so there's a lot of ships that will not go through the Suez Canal now. They're having to sail around the tip of Africa. That's imposed some delays and some imposed extra time into shipping. So those factors still are in play, but by and large, we're not seeing the dramatic delays that we saw a number of years ago, for example, during the pandemic.
Yeah. Robert Peaks, our guest, Chief Commercial Officer at JAXPORT. I'm just wondering, there's clearly the diversification that you talked about, but there's some expansion happening also. Tell us about some of the projects that are underway. And you forecast for me, you said, hey, at the end of 2025, JAXPORT's going to look physically different than we see it right now.
We are, particularly our facilities. And so there's a number of major projects that are happening. One of the most exciting is what's happening with a company called Southeast Toyota Distributors, which some people will know. They're a Florida company. They are the largest distributor of Toyota automobiles in North America. They come right out of Jacksonville, and they're building a new $130 million facility at the Port of Jacksonville to handle their imports and processing of their vehicles there. And this will be on 90 acres at our Blunt Island Marine Terminal. So it's a big construction project right now. It'll be done before the end of the year. And then basically adjacent to them, we have another big company called SSA. SSA has about $70 million project to densify, that is to be able to stack cargo containers deeper and taller than they can now, and expand their footprint at the port so they can handle more cargo containers. So those will be two projects that will, in terms of the physical assets of the port, will dramatically change what they look like today and increase the capability of those companies to handle more cargo.
I don't know that I prepared you for this, and I don't know why it's coming to mind now, but where JAXPORT is, how would you describe what the footprint is? Because there's a lot of St. Johns River that we can drive over or near or whatever when we go around Jacksonville.
So to briefly, basically we have 5 facilities. The Port Authority has 5 facilities along the St. Johns River. And they total about 1,500 acres of property. And if you're driving over the Dames Point Bridge and you're headed to the airport, so you're going north, as you crest the bridge, if you look out to your right, you're looking out to the east, that is the Blunt Island Marine Terminal. And if you look out to the other side, to the left, you're going to see our Dames Point Terminal, which is a cargo facility. There's also the cruise terminal there. And then closer to downtown Jacksonville, about 2 miles north of what I still call the Gator Bowl, where the Jaguars play, that's our Talleyrand Marine Terminal, and we also have our corporate headquarters there. And then under the foot of the Dames Point Bridge, on the north side of the bridge, we have a small railroad yard that we also own and run. So we have the 3 cargo terminals, the railroad yard, and the cruise terminal. Those are our 5 facilities.
Yeah, why so spread out? Because it gives an opportunity to have more traffic there or work on things in a specialized manner, or why is that designed that way?
It's space. So the original cargo terminal for the Port Authority was at our Talleyrand Marine Terminal facility, which was about 175 acres, and now it's a little over 200 acres. And that's basically built out. I mean, we have people...
No more room for expansion there.
So at the same time, in the 1960s, the Port Authority acquired the Blunt Island facility, which was basically a big dredge spoil site in the middle of the St. Johns River that the ports turned into a cargo terminal. And in the 1990s, we needed more room, and so we started building a facility at our Dames Point. So it really, at our Dames Point Marine Terminal. So it's really just because we needed space.
So there's clearly been enough space to bring in a new entertainment partner, if you will. So Norwegian Cruise Lines now here. We had talked about it a year ago, and where's that in the process?
Yes, so Jacksonville has had cruise service for about 20 years with Carnival Cruise Lines, and they will remain in Jacksonville, be a great partner. But beginning in November of this year, of 2025, Norwegian Cruise Lines is going to start service out of Jacksonville as well. And they're going to start a seasonal service to the Caribbean. So several night cruises that you'll be able to book, and they're going to go from November through the spring every year. And Carnival and Norwegian will actually share the cruise terminal. You won't have 2 ships at the same time.
Okay.
So when one ship's in, the other will be out, and kind of vice versa.
Yeah, that kind of maximizing the space there.
We'll maximize.
You didn't have to build something new for another cruise line to come in and share that.
That's exactly right. So we're excited about that because we mentioned our business diversification. I mentioned all the shipping containers we handle, all the automobiles we handle. We handle a lot of dry bulk aggregates, which is kind of crushed rock and limestone used for Florida Department of Transportation road construction. We handle things that don't go in containers, things like we call break bulk cargo. So pallets of paper and rolled paper and forest products and lumber. And we have the cruise business. So this whole diversification strategy is really key for us.
Yeah, because as we talked about before our interview today, even that cruise line business for a couple of years had such a tough time because of pandemic and the after effect.
That's exactly right. So for about 2 years, the U.S. government essentially shut down cruising into and out of U.S. ports. So for us at the time, that cruise business represented about 8% of our annual revenue. So it was a hit to us. But 92% of our business was something else because we were so well diversified. But we're glad to see it back now.
Yeah, of course. Maybe we wrap up here. The workforce for JAXPORT, is that something that has to keep expanding? And as we've talked about, the longshoremen, I mean, is everybody in place and happy about the work conditions there?
Yes, so at the Port Authority itself, we're actually kind of a small government agency relative to the size of the overall workforce. I mentioned there's about 30,000 people that actually depend upon the port. Well, only 172 of those people actually work for the Port Authority. Yeah. The rest of those all work for the private sector, if you will. And yes, that every time seems like we do an economic impact study, we see that due to the port growth, we see more jobs have come to Northeast Florida due to the port.
Yeah, those aren't typically minimum wage jobs.
No, those port jobs actually tend to pay pretty well.
Right.
The transportation jobs tend to pay pretty well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Robert Peak, I appreciate it. Chief Commercial Officer for JAXPORT, and State of the Port is what we've been talking about. But it's fun, especially for the folks who are listening and watching about this topic, to hear about the growth and the impact and everything that's happening there. So thanks for sharing that with us today.
My pleasure.
All right, and thank you for listening in or watching on This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. We would remind you, wherever you get your podcasts, go ahead and like, subscribe, or follow. New episodes come out every Thursday at 9 a.m. Thanks for being with us.